and welcome to the Core Connection. I'm Mira Rubin, here with you on Enlightened World Network, and today's topic is what would love do? And I think in these fractious times and times that are fraught with, as we approach the election, fraught with conflict, fear, anticipation, that this question, what would love do, is a really important one for those of us, well, for all of us, but particularly for those of us who are committed to creating a world in which we can all thrive and live more happily. That's the topic that or that's a question that would make a profound difference. So good morning, Rosalind. Welcome. So good to have you joining us this morning. And welcome to everybody else who's with us. Before we get started, we're going to take a minute or two to get present. So let's take a deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And imagine clean, crisp oxygen flooding your lungs, flowing into your bloodstream, nourishing all your cells and all your organs, bringing vital life energy to your body and being. And as you exhale, exhale any tension, negativity, fatigue. And now let's take another deep breath in through your nose and hold it. This time, imagine brilliant, bright light, lighting you up from the inside out, illuminating, electrifying, and energizing all your cells, your molecules, your electrons, creating a brilliant beam of light and energy from your heart out into the world. And as you exhale, exhale any remaining tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's press our palms together. Vigorously rub your hands together to feel the friction, the temperature, the pressure, the motion, the tickling and tingling when you stop. And allow all those sensations to bring you present right here, right now, into this remarkable physical form that enables us to experience life. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So, what would love do? It's such a beautiful and powerful, powerful question. And I know that so many of us are experiencing all kinds of anxiety and fear in the face of the upcoming election. And to address this disruption that we may be feeling, this question of what would love do becomes ever more important and valuable, I think. So in the face of the fear or in the face of conflict, to be asking what would love do is an important question. And I guess it then behooves us to be looking at what is the meaning of and what is the nature of love. And I do not necessarily believe that love is necessarily gentle all the time. And, I had this wonderful conversation with someone recently who said that they don't subscribe to the notion of tough love because it's often just an excuse to be awful. And I'm inclined to agree with that. Oh, Rosalind, thank you for the provocative question. What is the opposite of love? And I think I have an answer for that I invite you to entertain. Not like it's true, but this is what I've come to as the opposite of love is disconnection, separateness. Because I believe that it is our disconnection and our lack of connection that allows us to perpetrate what most of us would call evil. And so I think that when we are disconnected, it enables us to behave in ways that are unconscionable. We can see that with the way that we've behaved with the planet, the way that we've behaved with our perceived enemies, and even the way that we have behaved in regard to ourselves and our own growth and our own development, where we disconnect from behavior and compassion. And so I really appreciate that question, Rosalind, because it gets to the heart of what we're talking about when we talk about what would love do. And so if we talk about what is at the heart of love, I think we're talking about connection. And when we look at what would we do if we were actually connected, if we could recognize that connection, if we were present to that connection, how might our behavior be different? So with people that hold different beliefs and values, what would it look like if we spoke with them from a place of our connection and of our oneness? When we behave in ways that we don't necessarily approve of for ourselves, what would it look like to interact with ourselves in reference to that behavior from a place of love and connection and compassion? And it's very interesting that we use these disagreements as a justification for further separation. And this is where I believe that it takes courage to be loving. And being loving doesn't necessarily mean being a pushover, which gets to this conversation around tough love. Tough love being, as my client so aptly put it, an excuse for being, well, they didn't use this word, but not nice or not decent even. But I think love is fire also. So I was engaged in a conversation, again, family, right? We can find our ugliness probably most readily in the context of family because we give ourselves permission for that ugliness sometimes, where defenses are dropped and the teeth get bared. I don't know if that's the situation in every family, but I've seen it in many, and I've certainly seen it in mine. But where there was this debate emerging that started getting ugly and nasty, actually nasty and personal. And I just intervened very loudly, screaming, say no. no more of this. This isn't happening. We're not doing this. We're not going to ruin what has been a lovely time together by devolving into this kind of conflict. It's not. I may be deluding myself, but I tend to believe that that's what love would do in that situation, is to not allow that kind of altercation to proceed unchecked. And so I believe that love can be fire and not just gentleness, not just sweetness, but um, the way that we can connect to love. There's a fierceness that we can presence ourselves to in love as well, in terms of a stand for our connectedness. And of course, the gentleness and the sweetness of love is something powerful and profound and important as well. I think when we look at what is the opposite of love, being disconnection, we can use that as a powerful guide. Maybe it translates this rather abstract notion of love into something that is perhaps more actionable when we recognize love as coming from a place of connection. So what would love do in these debates between one another, in these upsets that often have been used to drive us further apart? When we look at what would love do, what would connection do, what would unity do, that might give us a little bit more of a framework to operate from. And the thing is that maybe love isn't passive. You know, maybe the act of presencing ourselves to love is not a passive act. It takes one of commitment and choice. It takes one of deliberate intention to focus our energies on this deeper unity. So I was listening this morning to a guy who is an expert on cults. He had been, I don't know how many of you remember the Moonies from years ago. He had been a Moonie and was very devoted to the movement. And he said he had agreed to his deprogramming just to prove that he wasn't programmed at all. And it was through this process of deprogramming that he recognized that he had been brainwashed. And I look at the political landscape, and it just feels to me like so many people have been brainwashed that you know, that the rational conversation isn't even available. Of course, this is just my vantage point. Again, I'm not saying it's true. You may disagree, you may have different observations, and that's absolutely fine. But what he said is that when speaking with someone, and I think this works for all of us in terms of civil conversation, is to be compassionate and curious, to come from a place of connection, to be legitimately coming from a place of connection when asking questions from a real place of curiosity rather than a place of attempted manipulation. Like, what is your experience? And at the very least, what we might gain from this is a richer understanding of each other rather than trying to press an agenda, rather than creating a conflict or resistance, to be legitimately curious. And I think maybe in one of the things that love would do is actually cultivate that curiosity. Curiosity, as I often say, is the antidote to judgment. And when we can step outside our own framework long enough to be curious, authentically curious, rather than arguing, which is what so many of us do, myself included. I've fallen into that myself. But to step into being legitimately curious, there's an opportunity for us to learn something. There's an opportunity for us to connect. We may disagree, but we can find a respect, a mutual, perhaps, hopefully, some kind of mutual common ground, some kind of place of even coming to the place of we can agree to disagree, respectfully. And I think that we're coming up upon a moment of decision in our country, and so many of us are mired in fear around it, and creating factions and fractions, and those of us particularly who are committed to the evolution of our consciousness and of our being, get to call ourselves to a higher standard than we may have already held of finding connection. Because whatever the outcome of this election, there are going to be a lot of people that are upset. And rather than feeding those flames of discord, it's beholden to all of us to find a path of peace, to find a path of reconciliation, because we are all connected. And there have been so many divisive messages, creating factions, creating us and them kind of scenarios. It's easy to buy into that. And it takes a deep discipline to recognize that we are all reflections of each other, even though it looks like we may be on opposite sides of an issue, even though it looks like, or many people are creating this idea of enemy. What if we are all reflections of ourselves? What if that polarity resides in each of us? What if this is an opportunity to find reconciliation within ourselves, find connection between these parts of ourselves that contradict, find a way to embrace those parts of ourselves that maybe we've exiled, to actually bring connection back within ourselves and between us. I don't know if it ever was there actually, but to bring it into being. What would it look like? What would it look like for us to not further these rifts that exist, but to find a way to build bridges, regardless of the outcome of the election specifically? What would it look like? What would it look like to find a place of peace in ourselves and with each other? And that's not to say that there aren't actions that we might engage in, that there aren't choices that we need to make based on the outcome that occurs. But how can we open our hearts to each other's humanity? What can we do to build those bridges, to create connection? Because isn't that in truth the future that we're really looking to have? You know, is a future of divisiveness, especially in these times when we have such insanely advanced, disconnected tools of war. There's no good outcome from that. There's no good outcome from propagating these conflicts. And I know that this isn't necessarily a commonly held belief. I'm looking for a way that humanity can find a path that provides us with a future in harmony with our planet and in harmony with one another. How can we do that? The first step toward doing that is finding it within ourselves and our own behavior and our own communications and our own reactivity. And that's not a minor quest in and of itself. I don't know about you. I have some very deeply held perspectives, and the inclination that I've been schooled to and that I have fallen into is to fight for those beliefs and those perspectives. And what if there's another way? Maybe the path of love. I'm not sure. I don't know. I don't know how it works. I don't know that it's tried and tested. But I think it's a worthy question. What would love do? It's not like I have answers, but I think it's a worthy question, and one that calls us for our attention and our commitment and our courage because I think it takes courage to be willing to listen. Because there's always the risk that we might hear something that changes our mind and that shifts our perspective, that rattles our cage, that calls us to think more expansively, to entertain something that we held to be anathema to us. There's always that possibility, is that we might think differently, and therefore we may be challenged to think of ourselves differently and think of the world differently. And that could threaten our sense of security and solidity and continuity. But I think that love has that courage. And so maybe we can invite ourselves into this space. Rosalind says the peacemaker, the inner dialogue conflict. Yes, to find a way to include it all, to expand, to include it all. And just leave ourselves with the guiding principle of what would love do. It's a challenge, and it takes courage. And I invite us all to step into that challenge. So that's it for this morning. I'm Mira Rubin. This is the Core Connection. And I invite you to like, follow, and share Enlightened World Network and me. The links are in the description. I go live each morning at 9 a.m. Eastern on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page and YouTube channel. And as always, it is a privilege and a pleasure to engage in these questions and queries into what it is to be human. So until next time, so much love to you.